And so the goal for today is to partly show you how diverse, not only how critical the field of conservation is for the future of our planet, but also how diverse, as exemplified in the different work that our speakers do. We have chimpanzee behavior in Uganda, agrosystems in Costa Rica, um, marine ecology in the Pacific, birds in the US. So they are all doing very different work. And so the goal today is to try to get a snapshot of what it is like, what is conservation, what it is like to work in it, what skills do you need to get a foot in the door and to thrive in it, but also the challenges. So basically, we'll be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly, hopefully. And so with that, please help me welcome Michael Reed, Randi Rotjan, Colin Orians, and Zarin Machanda. And I'm going to skip the formal introductions because otherwise that would eat up another half of the event. So I encourage you to look at their bios in our website. And so I had prepared a few questions to get us started, but my hope is that soon we'll be able to just turn it over to the audience so that they can ask the questions that they really care about. So to get us started, I just wonder if should I sit down? I cannot see you very well, so I'm going to sit here. So I was wondering if very quickly could each of you could describe what your research involves today, but also share a moment, a specific moment when you knew you were in the right track, that this path was for you, unless, of course, you knew what you wanted to do, when you grew up, which I think most of the time is not the case. I know for myself that was not the case. I know for the vast majority of the students that I meet on a regular basis, it's not the case. So when did you know that you were where you wanted to be? And
Hi, everyone. So I am a primatologist. I study wild chimpanzees in Uganda, and I have a field site and a house and everything over there. My research is mostly on social behavior, so I understand the form and function of chimpanzee social bonds. I've wanted to work with animals my entire life. I saw a documentary when I was 5 years old of sending chimpanzees to space, and I decided I wanted to be an astronaut veterinarian to take care of chimpanzees in space. So I've known for a very long time. My dad had a lifelong subscription to National Geographic, and I distinctly remember reading an article about rhinos and trying to do IVF in rhinos. And I was 10 years old, and I said, that's what I'm going to do with my life. So I've known for a very long time. That's not usual, though, I think.
So I'm Colin Orians in the biology department. My dad's a biologist, so I spent a lot of time thinking, do I really want to be a biologist, or am I just doing it because I was exposed to it? So it was a big challenge for me to sort of figure out. So I thought about being a soil scientist, which felt like I was getting as far away from my dad's field, who studied birds. Or I just thought environmental law, but it really wasn't until sort of my senior year that I took a course to the Galapagos with my college. And it was so inspirational to think about the connection between land and animals and the beauty of biodiversity and the evolutionary histories of different islands that I thought I really want to study some aspect of biodiversity in my life. And that just sort of triggered my future career.
I didn't know I wanted to be a biologist until very late. So you have quite the range here. I thought I wanted to be a poet. I still kind of do. It's still fun. And there's actually a lot, science is a really creative endeavor. But I didn't realize that I wanted to be a marine ecologist until I made the choice to sort of go to graduate school. So at the undergrad level, I had done a senior thesis on honeybees, and I had worked a little bit with plants after that as a technician. And I was just smitten by biology at that point, right? The entire world was really interesting. I didn't know where I wanted to focus. And so I guess perhaps reasonably, I ended up working on corals, which are kind of a colonial animal like honeybees and kind of like a plant through symbiosis, and animals in their own right. And they work in partnership with a lot of different communities. So for me, that felt like home. But I'll answer the question from a conservation point of view, too. I realized that I needed to sort of straddle the line between science and conservation relatively early once I had decided to be in marine science, because the very first global bleaching event for corals was in 1998, and I entered this field in 2001, so very shortly thereafter. And it was impossible over the arc of my career to study an ecosystem objectively and just study it for the nature itself, because nature was changing under my eyes, and it was not objective, right? I had thoughts and feelings and emotions about that and wanted to start working to try to help protect ecosystems at the same time I was studying them. So that became very clear over the course of graduate school.
Michael Reed. As I started bird watching in high school and college, I got into bird ecology, and I started my master's. I knew I wanted to do bird ecology, but I didn't know what. And at the time, conservation biology as a field didn't really exist because I'm old. And in my second year of my master's, I took a seminar in conservation genetics. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. I could do this. And then went off and did a PhD on an endangered species and was pretty much sold on it then. So mine was actually a moment from a class that converted me from general ecology into conservation.
Maybe we should use 2 mics.
I just want to invite those of you in the back.
And when they come forward, I I will go on to my next question. So I think many of you mentioned grad school as part of this journey. So, and I know that many of our students are interested in going to grad school, maybe after they graduate, maybe a few years later. So I was wondering if you could give some advice about going to grad school, like what type of programs should they be looking into? When should they go? Should they do a master's before a PhD? And what should they be doing right now to be competitive for grad school?
Well, I actually might answer a slightly different question, which is I think, this panel is a little bit biased because we're all professors. So we have PhDs and we went to graduate school and we're academics. And some of us do conservation as our research programs, and some of us do conservation because we study endangered species. And so we kind of have to practically do that. I don't think you need to go to graduate school to have a career in conservation, right? So I have an NGO in Uganda that works on community conservation. And we just hired an executive director, and she doesn't even have a master's degree, but she has a lot of wonderful experience at various NGOs in the field, at zoos, and doing other things. So I don't think that this panel should necessarily skew you all to be like, oh, we need to go get a PhD in order to be a conservationist, because you really don't. We work with lots and lots and lots of people who don't go to graduate school. Oh, I'm sorry.
But that's where the money is.
Graduate school is where the money is? This is not true.
I always want to build on that for a minute, because graduate school in the sciences is really about becoming a scientist, right? Going through the process of science, soup to nuts, from an idea and a question all the way through to sort of analyzing results and figuring out the interpretation of your experiment or your observations. But conservation, while it uses the tools of science, is not inherently a science. It's a political one, right? You're trying to protect something which engages fields of law and science and policy and humanities and communications and right, business, all the things. And so I get asked this question a lot, and I think conservation needs everyone and from all walks of life, and there isn't sort of a singular path towards it. So I just want to echo that. And yeah.
And if you've been looking at Hope Cunningham lectures for a long time, 2 things I've noticed from a lot of the talks when people talk about their pathway is, one is it's almost completely unreplicable because everybody did something unusual or a surprise happened. But the thing that it was a common theme in all of them is people took advantage of an opportunity. So I think as an undergrad, you should be trying lots of things. And if an opportunity shows up, even if it's not, oh, that's what I want to do the rest of my life, go do it, because it'll give you experience and it might be what you want to do the rest of your life. But be open to opportunities. So that's been a theme in Hope Cunningham since it started, is people taking advantage of opportunities.
Maybe the only thing I would add to these excellent answers is that there are lots of different ways that you can engage, right? Some people are like really data scientists and they want to build up their data skills, and they're going to work more behind the scenes in the field of conservation. But the actual doing of conservation, the success of getting change, is a very people-oriented endeavor, which means learning how to communicate with people, how to convince them that what you're doing is valid and important, and wanting them to get on board. And so you as a practitioner needs to think, where do you best fit? Some people are people, some people are not so much people. So you get to decide where you want to fit in that. And so I would just encourage you to build up, your quantitative skills. If that's the direction you want to go, build up your people, communication, writing skills, if that's something that you want to do. But ultimately, it's going to be the love of the nature and the love of the people that interact with that nature that's going to help you make change.
But I will say the writing thing, I don't care how much you don't like it. You're going to have to do it for a lot of the profession. So one of my former students works for the Nature Conservancy, and she said her most important skill was writing. And ChatGPT can't do it for you. Well, it can, but it'll suck. So you do actually need communication skills, no matter where you fall on this.
I'm going to answer your question now. Okay. About grad school. So, yeah. So I know the job market is pretty scary right now because I have a lot of seniors trying to find internships and jobs in various fields right now. And so I think that a lot of times students are like, well, maybe I'll just stay in school and get a master's. And just remember that oftentimes you have to pay for masters. So that is not necessarily always kind of the best thing you can be doing. I think masters are great if you feel like there's like content you still need to learn or skills that you still want to develop for a future career that you might think about doing a master's. PhDs in science in the United States, you generally should be paid to do, not well, but you generally should not be paying for a PhD. But it's the longest, sometimes most painful independent study of your life, right? Like it is you have to have a lot of passion for the subject because you're the only one who is telling yourself, right? You have to basically motivate yourself to do it. And so I always say to students, like, I mean, it sounds really silly, but I wake up in the morning and be like, I love studying chimps. There are so many things I want to know about them. And I think that you do have to have a little bit of like kind of that drive for knowledge to pursue a PhD, because it can be pretty awful if you don't really have that kind of drive for that knowledge.
I think that there are sorry, I think I am. I just didn't have it close enough to me. Am I? Yeah. I think there are trade-offs, I think is kind of what Zarin is getting at, to both a master's and a PhD. And I'll just add a little bit to it, which is that a master's can be a really beautiful thing if you know what you want to get out of it. You go in, you blitz it, even if you pay for it, right? You get out on the other side and sometimes there's a pay raise that immediately comes from a benefit of having a master's, and it functionally pays for itself in a year or two. Sometimes it gives you exactly the, especially for pivoting fields, or if you really need to round something out, it can be really helpful. Sometimes it's the terminal degree for you because that's all you really need to do with school and you know exactly where you want to go. So it can be a really valuable thing, even if you have to pay for it, but don't pay for it just because it's the next thing to do. You're like, I'm not sure what else to do, so I'll go get a master's. Like in no case, you're like, I don't know what else to do, so I'll just jump into school. I personally just think that it's, if you know what you want to get out of any situation, you're going to get more out of it. There are situations which you pivot along the way. So I don't want to say never, but I think it's really helpful to know what you want to get out of a master's. If you are going to a PhD, I think it's also helpful to know why you're doing that. Like your why is really important. And so often people get a PhD because they want to drive the direction of the research, right? They have this innate intellectual curiosity. What keeps you up in bed at night? You don't want to work on somebody else's project. You don't want to contribute to, this agency's objectives or this company's priorities, right? You want to drive the intellectual direction of the research. That's a really good reason to get a PhD, in my opinion. So I'd be really interested to hear what everyone else thinks, because I think there's a diversity of opinions on this, but those are some of the trade-offs to consider from my perspective.
A student of mine who followed that pathway, he started a PhD at the University of Chicago, decided what he really wanted to do was conservation, took a master's and left to work for the Nature Conservancy, worked for them for 4 years and realized he was not the guy who got to drive the car. He wanted to be in charge. So he came back and got a PhD. If you want to be in charge. Another thing, if you go off to a PhD, when you interview, try to remember that you're interviewing them as well as them interviewing you. And one of the biggest, if not the biggest, driver for success in grad school is getting along with your advisor. So if you meet with somebody and there's something that bothers you about them, look somewhere else and talk to their grad students, see how it is to be in that grad program.
Thank you. And you started talking about, which was going to be my next question, lesser known careers in conservation that doesn't require being a professor. And I know some of you work with NGOs. Do you want to elaborate a bit more in the conversation we started in the previous question? Is there anything else you wanted to share? Like what kind of, and maybe this segues to my next question, which is internships. Like what kind of experiences should students be getting right now to have their first entry-level job in the conservation world that is not academia?
Yeah, so as an undergrad, you want to be building some tools that you can use everywhere. People who've had a class from me know, first thing I'm going to say is take GIS. It's highly marketable. I'm working with my good friend runs an NGO. The one employee in his NGO got his undergrad degree from Tufts 3 years ago, and all he does is GIS. And he does great work and he does field work with it. Basic statistics. If you're taking a stat class, try and take it in R, because even though it's kind of annoying to learn, it's what everybody's using. So part of wherever you see yourself going is it's a skill sets you're picking up now. And undergrad degree in stats won't get you a job, but having some GIS will. And so it's a pretty low bar skill, and it's widely used in professions.
Let me just add a little flavor to that, because I think I just realized very recently exactly how powerful GIS can be for conservation. I know in a really interesting way. I work with a large sort of consortium of NGOs, and we work with many countries, so 60 different countries. So I'll keep this anonymized. We were working with a country, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on a concept for a new protected area. And I was wondering why we were stalling, because they wanted to create it and we wanted to help them create it, and yet we weren't getting anywhere. And you know what we were missing? We were missing a map of like what the protected area could look like and what the various configurations of the spatial sort of construct could look like. And they needed to sort of visualize it and to see it. And we were looking for them to lead a vision, and they were looking for us to lead a vision. And once we literally had a bunch of maps that we could to draft and to edit, the whole thing unlocked, and the protected area should be announced in a few weeks, right? So it's like it's just, you can use it for many different things. But to me, it was just this incredible moment where I didn't realize that that's what we were missing. And I don't have the GIS skills to have pulled that out. But luckily we had an employee at the institution who did. So plus for GIS.
I'm going to have a different answer, which is I think anyone can be a conservationist, right? So we work with doctors, we work with lawyers, I work with someone who works at Formaggio Kitchen who loves honey and is trying to save honeybees. So I think any kind of career can be focused on conservation, sustainability. I don't study conservation. I mean, I study chimps, and so the data is really important, and having data and GIS skill, big data, big GIS skills. But for me, and we do a lot of stuff with our data that we collect for our NGOs, but the biggest skill that you can have is talking to people and talking to people who are not from where you are from, who have different priorities in life, who have different needs and expectations, who in many, many cases for tropical conservation, who live in absolute poverty, and you need to try to balance their needs with the needs of the thing you're trying to conserve. And so that doesn't actually require, I mean, I'm not sure I don't think I took a class in it at all, but I traveled and I put myself out there and I exposed myself to lots of different things. So I do think that one of the things that many students can do, besides doing research, which is just a way for you to learn whether or not you like the research side of some of this stuff, whether you like the data, but it is also to do field work, like go be uncomfortable somewhere, go be hot and tired and sticky and then have to like interact with people in those conditions. And that's a good, if you can do that, that's actually really good practice.
So I was actually, thank you for plugging Costa Rica. So I teach a tropical ecology and conservation class.
Which Randi took.
Anybody else here? Yeah, we have a few people who took the class here. It's going to be offered next fall. So if you're interested, you can learn more about it. But in that class, one of the things we do is we try to interact with local stakeholders. And so Yolanda Rodriguez is a woman who lives in a community called Rancho Quemado, which means burning ranch. It used to be an area where there was a ton of poaching, and they're trying to transition away from being a poaching community to sort of a community that's actually involved in conservation. And the reason I bring this up is that by supporting her, you can actually be supporting conservation. It's very difficult as a gringo going into Costa Rica and try to affect change if you're not networked with people in the country. And I think Zarin would tell the same story about Uganda, how important it is to work with local communities. Yolanda's getting all sorts of awards right now for her work in this community, and it's really inspiring to see that work. But she's just one of many people in Costa Rica who are trying to work with their local communities to affect change. And so one of the things that I try to do in the course is just realize that we can't go alone. We have to work with partners. We can't be there as much, right? So can we help lay the groundwork? Can we facilitate the work of other people? So especially if you're working internationally, the politics of working internationally are really challenging because you can't be the outside person telling people what to do.
Actually, why don't we continue on that topic, since I also had it in one of my reserve questions. I think most of you, if not all of you, work with community partners. So can you talk a little bit more about how those partnerships are effective in pushing forward the conservation agenda? How do you not become that person that Colin just described?
Sure, I'll start maybe. One of the big organizations I work for is a partnership of partnerships. And I realize it's just a phrase you throw around, but if you think of conservation as a community endeavor and as a partnership assist, that's really valuable, right? So it takes so many people to try to protect nature because nature has no voice to try to protect itself, right? It's really complicated. And you're competing against a landscape of every other need that's out there, right? Poverty, healthcare, education, and pick the issue. And to try to give voiceless nature, a spot on that agenda is really challenging. So leaning into the gifts that you have, but also taking yourself out of the ego equation is the whole thing for me, at least. It's about trying to, help somebody where you can truly be helpful and then step back when it's time for you to step back in order to try to, and the goal is to protect the thing, right? That part of nature, whether it's a species or a habitat or an ecosystem or a spot on a map that somebody, maybe you or maybe somebody else, right, has created, whatever that is. It's having a little bit of that humility and a little bit of that sort of team mentality that makes it work. And where I see it fail often is when you sort of see that jockeying and that jostling for position and everyone sort of forgets what the end goal it really is.
I think it's also, I mean, so in some ways you also have to maybe rethink that a little because for me, ultimately we're trying to protect a national park that has chimps in it. But our goal is actually to find a balance between protecting the national park and helping local people who live around there because their needs are going to maybe actually contradict each other sometimes. And so we have to find the right kind of balance. I think for the life of a conservationist, this is going to change as you kind of keep working in a place. So when we first started working in Uganda, I think you always have to go in and be like, okay, I'm not Ugandan. I have no idea what people need or what they want. And so you start by, I mean, we do all the fundraising, but we start by having many, many, many stakeholder meetings, talking to people, making sure that these are things that people on the ground actually want. Because you can spend a lot of money doing something that nobody wants. As you continue working in a place, one of the goals that we should always try to think about is not how do we come in and keep this organization going, but how do we develop a generation of people who live in these places to be conservationists on their own and to develop that next generation so that all I end up having to do is write grants for the ideas that they give me, right? So they're the ones now who are on the ground. We've been there 35 years. So now we have a whole generation of kids who have grown up who want to conserve the national park, who are from this area. And now they tell us what their ideas are and what their plans. And I'm like, yeah, I could write a grant for that. And so I think it's changed as we have been there longer. And now we don't necessarily have to, they do almost all the thinking for us, right? Because we're still not Ugandan, even though I've worked there for 2 decades.
And you don't always have to be the person who's the front person for the conversation. If you're more like me, I don't really like people, but I know that.
He does like people.
Right. But I know the type of people I like to work with. I work with the Fish and Wildlife Service a lot, the Forest Service, NGOs, and I often work with people who are good at the outreach part of it. So I find out what they need and I work with the services on that. And then they do the interface. You don't always have to be the outgoing, pressing the flesh person if that's not the type of person you are. You just have to find out where you do fit in. And the other thing that I'm hearing here is that when people say you need to talk to people, what they mean is you need to listen, not talk.
I'm just going to ask one more question. I'm going to turn it over to the audience, but so I think we should talk about the ugly. I think conservation is one of those careers that is often romanticized, and I think you may have mentioned that this is not a career for the faint of heart. So I wanted to hear from you. What those challenges are? What do those mean to you in particular? And what do you yourself do to prevent burn down?
About 8 years ago, we started a project in Costa Rica on sort of coffee and different ways of growing coffee to support farmers to do it more sustainably, which is kind of conservation adjacent. And the community that we were working in, we're really frustrated because they've had a lot of scientists come in, do their studies, and then leave, and they never see them again. And so I think the ugly part of conservation is how sometimes you can get a grant. It's a 3-year grant, it's a 5-year grant. You go in and you do the study, and then you leave, and the community is left with very little, maybe a presentation, if you've taken the time to do that. And so we were very conscious about every year creating a document in Spanish that could be shared with the 30 farmers that were working with us, going down there and sharing our results. And they were all blown away that we were doing this. Yet we could never get that long-term grant. So we haven't been able to sustain that contact with these farmers because the funding has been really challenging. And so the ugly side is not being in touch. The other ugly side is how do you keep it going in a fundraising sort of standpoint in order to keep those relationships. So 35 years is pretty amazing. I think Zarin could probably write a grant in her sleep. Coffee, agroecology, there's not quite the same amount of funding for that field. And so you have to sort of think really strategically how you're going to sort of keep relationships going.
So another piece of the ugly that requires you to keep remembering about the other contexts is that you can often do a study, discover something that's absolutely correct, and no one wants to do it. And you might have forgotten that yours was only one of 6 competing interests, and you have to keep that in mind. There's also been a lot of talk recently in the last couple of years of people getting eco burnout, that people working in the field, they do a lot of personal sacrifice because it's what they care about. And when things aren't working or things get tough, after a while it wears you down. So I think for a lot of folks engaged in the on the ground work, they can burn out. I think there you need to step away or find something that refreshes you, but be aware it's there and don't wake up every day hating that you're doing it. Recognize that it's happening and then try to figure out a way to solve that.
For me, the ugly side is very tangible because I am in the field of marine protected areas at a time when marine ecosystems are crashing. And it's an invisible problem because the ocean looks fine on its surface, right? You go to the beach, it looks beautiful, right? I do it too. Everything looks fine, and it's not fine. And everything that can be done can be undone, which can be redone, which can be undone. So and again, it's the cycle. And so it's very hard to watch a whole lot of work and money and energy done right, stakeholder engagement, community led, really powerful conservation initiatives that can really empower nature to help nature help itself through this moment that we're in with climate change and with a lot of other environmental sort of issues. And then you go same way grants are ephemeral, so are political regimes, right? And so things can change very, very quickly post-election. 2 years ago was a big year. More than 50% of the globe went through an election and had a change in leadership. And that changed a lot of things everywhere. And it's hard. And so for me, when I think about burnout, because it certainly happens as you watch the ecosystems that I absolutely love struggle, and you watch some of the things that you worked really hard to get created, and you celebrate that win only to watch it fail, you just have to remember that it can be redone, and that the moment we give up is the real moment of failure, right? Because nature cannot speak for itself. So that keeps me going, and I just sort of embrace the journey. There's even a word for it in the marine science field. We now call it the conservation journey, and it has loop backs, and it has dips, and it has ups, and it has downs, and it has pivots back to the beginning, and then it's, well, we can accelerate further this time because we learned from the dip, right? It is not a straight line. It is a twisted, turny, back on itself, forward, sort of 17 steps back, 3 steps forward kind of movement. And I just sort of am here for that ride.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the feels. So the ugly for me is, in 2013, over the course of a week, 6 of the chimps that I'd studied for most of my career died in a respiratory virus epidemic. And it just was the common cold. And I killed 6 chimps in 6 days. And I'd known most of these chimps most of their adult lives. So they're like my kids. They're the worst behaved kids you've ever wanted. But they're like my kids. And, you think it was the common cold. I could have done something about that. So there's so many failures in conservation. There's so many setbacks. I describe myself as a person, like an ultra optimist. My glass is 75% full because it has to be. You have to wake up and you have to think, no, I still think I can do something. I still think, despite losing 6 chimps, or a political regime changing, and many of the aid services in the country you work with just close all of a sudden, and you just have to get up and think, okay, well, maybe I won't save chimps in the same way I used to, but I'll just try something new. So I think there has to be a certain amount of Michael will not enjoy this word, resilience, right? But you have to be able to be knocked down and get back up, and knocked down even further and get back up every single day.
Right. On that happy note, we are going to move the. It was very. No, I meant the happy note. I meant it.
Yeah,
I
you
think
asked
it's
us
a
about
great idea.
failures,
No,
but had you asked us about happy notes, we all
No,
could
no,
have
but I
given you good
thought
stories.
I
Yeah.
thought what you said is not only realistic, but actually it's very positive. If people who did this work didn't feel like that, there would be nobody doing this work. So I was not joking. So on that note, who has a question for our speakers?
Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Mahima Karthik. I'm a freshman here. I was wondering, in your work, how do you balance like when you're doing the conservation work, how do you balance like the science with the policy in the places that you're at with like the legislation, and then also like like you said, there are other needs that there are other problems that you have to kind of prioritize. So how do you kind of work with other people who maybe aren't who are maybe like things like human health. People are prioritizing like human health and like other things. How do you balance all of those in your work?
So the answer is carefully. You balance it carefully, and it's not your decision to make, which is, I think, part of what we're talking about when we sort of say that you're one piece of this puzzle. If you're talking to a legislature or a government official, it is their decision to make. You are a stakeholder providing information. Sometimes that information is commissioned, right? So I often have to like do a scientific workup of an area or create the case to conserve, and I will give that to an NGO or to a different practitioner or to sometimes the opposition, and actually for debate, or sometimes to a government official. And so, I will help create that science and that scientific case with the help of all of the peer-reviewed literature. Many of the scientists who have contributed to this piece without ever knowing it, because they just put it in the peer-reviewed literature, I cited it and used it, often with the help of a team of other people who will help create that science. And sometimes it's used for good. Sometimes it's used for not good. Sometimes it's not used at all. And that is part of the journey, right? But when it's conservation, very rarely is driven by that end paragraph of your discussion that says, practitioner, I found this, so practitioners should do that. It almost never works that way. It's the other way around, where practitioners or governments will say, I want to do this. Is there a scientific justification for it? Right. And so it flips. And so I will often write those for many different countries, including our own, for many different cases, or help lead them. And sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not, but it is really about listening to what the objective is and asking yourself the hard question of, is there a there? Is there a scientific case to be made? And when there isn't, you gain credibility by telling the truth and saying there isn't a case to be made here, but here's what I think you can say, or here's what I think you would need in order to answer your question. Here's the piece of science that I think you could commission, right? Or grant or contract to try to get more information for your goal.
I think the other way to balance it, I mean, I don't think any of us work in isolation. So everything we do is teamwork, right? Conservation is only going to work if you have a team of people. And just between the two NGOs I have in Uganda, we have a staff and with directors and everything, about 50 people doing this work, which includes lawyers and doctors. And so it's not just you. One of the things that I say is like, I'm very good at bringing people together so that I don't have to do all of the parts. But with the balancing of the science, I think you also have to, and this gets at what Randi said, you have to also admit that you're wrong, right? Like the best scientists I know are the ones who'll be like, oh, I was wrong about that. And I think that's really important because you can't just like get on a soapbox about your particular idea. If your idea is actually wrong, you're not actually helping anything.
If you do want to hear a good story, though, one of the people I work with has been working in forests in Maine for the last 30 plus years, and tying into Randi's map, part of the work we did for the last 5 years was creating a map of old growth forest in Maine, including in the 4.2 million hectares of commercial forest there. And state legislation passed last summer to look into how we should go about protecting that. And the landowners who allowed us on their land, some of them have now kicked us off their land. Even though they helped pay for the work, they didn't like the map that came out of it because now they might be held accountable. But, you know, this is the first time I can ever remember any work I did leading directly to legislation. It's always been more like what Randi said. It's a piece that goes into a larger document for support.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Quinn. I am a senior, but I have another semester in the fall. I'm an environmental studies student, and also I'm at New England Conservatory in the dual degree. And I have some like kind of maybe niche interests that I could see myself further exploring in graduate school, but I'm not completely sure like what that looks like for me right now. And so I guess I was wondering if you had any advice about like entering sort of work, but also fostering some of those interests that I might sort of want to continue school at some point with. So yeah, that kind of balance where grad school is of interest, but not like I don't have a direct sort of plan or like path there.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when you describe that is just the role of sound in today's world. There's so many people studying soundscapes from here in New England to the tropics and trying to decipher what's going on in the world around them through sound. But I don't know if that's your niche.
Yeah, no, that's related. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's where you took me. And so there are books being written about sound and in the sciences, and you know, Ed Yong wrote a great book on it's called The Immense World, I believe is the right title. And he gets into the umwelt of every organism, really writes from the sensory perceptions of each of those organisms. Some of those are based on sound. So maybe you'll find some amazing sort of, maybe it'll be like a lecture that you had in class. Maybe there'll be something in that book that will trigger your next steps. That's my first.
If you don't know if you want to go to grad school, don't start a PhD. PhD is when you already know what you want to do. A master's is a good way to explore things. Getting a job for a few years as an itinerant field tech or doing internships is a great way to find out what you want to do. But don't, as everyone says, there's a lot of different pathways in, and if you don't know you want a PhD and need it, don't start it.
There were some questions all the way in the back. I just wanted to make sure they were seen.
Thank you.
Karen, you wanted to add something?
I would just say I've had 2 students who from Tufts have gone on to do internships at Woods Hole on soundscapes. So it's maybe potentially a way to like, there are some internships and researchers looking for year-long RAs that might kind of keep your foot in the door and give you a sense of like, oh, maybe I do want to do this.
The premier person and one of the best places for that is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which also happens to work on whales, just so you know. And birds. No, and primates. So it's don't let that fool you. They do a lot of things.
Go ahead.
Awesome. My name is Michael. I'm a freshman here, just thinking about what I want to study. Just had a question because obviously you guys touched on, you know, some of like the struggles and the challenges of being conservationists in this world right now. But I just was wondering if each of you wouldn't mind touching on like a positive story and perhaps like the biggest conservation outcome that has like taken part in your respective fields. Just something like a good story, something that's happened that has like your research has resulted in an outcome and a change and something like that.
When we started studying the chimps in Kibale National Park, we had 48 chimps in our community, and today we have 70. So we're one of the very few populations of wild chimps that's growing. I don't know how, it's hard to know. These things are stochastic. So, but I do think, we have some amazing, we've had some actually amazing success since 2013, reducing respiratory viruses. We have kind of a pathway that we've recognized of how those viruses get into the chimps through school children. We started a hand washing campaign where we've reduced childhood respiratory viruses in the schools by 30%. Like, those are all really positive. We've sent like 200 kids to secondary school, and one of them actually got into Harvard for undergrad and went and did his MBA, and now he's like, he grew up in rural Uganda with, illiterate farming parents, and like, I mean, if that's all I do in my life, that's pretty good.
So my story, I can't take really any credit for, but I can tell you a story about other people. So when my grad student Gabriela Garcia started working in this small town Cope de Dota to study coffee, she went to a local community meeting where the head of the local cooperative was saying, this is what we need to do to be successful as a very much a coffee community. And by the way, I can't sell your rainforest certified coffee, so don't go there. Fast forward 4 years, he's saying, I can't get enough rainforest certified coffee. Please go there. And so the whole community is shifting towards figuring out a way to make their coffee shade certified. And when you add shade and that kind of biodiversity to a farm, it helps all sorts of different levels of biodiversity. So we can't take any credit for that, but the consumer, decided that you wanted to drink shade coffee and source coffee from farms that are doing that, you have an impact on farmers in Costa Rica and the choices that they make that will support biodiversity. And in our conversations with some of the farmers there, it was like, how many of them really valued the nature around them and were planting trees that were good for bees, and like they really felt connected to their land. And for them to be able to then be rewarded for that connection by being able to get a premium price was so satisfying. But again, it's not my story, it's really their story.
In 1977, there was one large-scale marine protected area. It was the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park in Australia. In 2006, there were two. There was the Phoenix Islands Protected Area in Kiribati, and there was the Northwest Hawaiian Islands in Hawaii in the United States. And now there are over 50. And by large scale marine protected areas, I mean 100,000 square kilometers or larger. Are they perfect? No. Are they fully protected? No. Are they forever? No. But is the movement moving and recognition to try to protect the oceans in a meaningful way at the scale at which oceans work? That is gaining traction, and I'm going to call that a win.
I've already done Maine, so.
I'm almost tempted to leave it at that.
Hello, my name is Hana, and I'm a second-year student who's currently working towards a BFA. The question I have for you, something I'm kind of delighted by, is just how varied all of your guys' specific areas of interest are. And I'm just curious, I would love to hear from each of you out of all of the diversity that nature has to offer and all the diversity in ecosystems, what specifically about your special like species interested you and got you so excited that you could make a career out of it?
And to that, maybe you can add some final thoughts so we can wrap up the event.
I have no idea. When I was in middle school, a family moved into a house up the street from me, and the father was a marine biologist. There were 3 boys within a year of my age, and one of them watched birds, so I started watching birds. And so it was a chance event.
Corals are beautiful. I love them. Full stop.
I want to add on to your answer, just because, I've known Michael for his entire career at Tufts, and because I came a year before him, so I'm his senior. But what really struck me is he immediately connected to Manomet, and he got connected to the NGO world in New England. And that has opened so many doors for his students and him, that sort of being there in the right place at the right time and opening doors has been really fun to watch his students thrive in. For me, I have ADHD when it comes to sort of research topics. So I have studied tropical leaf-cutting ants. I have studied willows in New England. I have studied hemlocks, and they're dealing with invasive species, exotic insects. I've studied tea in China and coffee in Costa Rica. So I keep shifting. Some of it's more conservation adjacent, some of it's not so conservation adjacent, because I still find just the questions of how plants deal with stressors in the environment, whether it's an insect or climate related, really interesting. And then when I got into tea and coffee, it was sort of thinking about, well, people are consumers too, not just insects that feed on the plants. And so how can I think about weaving in another perspective on consumers and began working with people. And I do like people, so I like to sort of explore ways to sort of connect that way.
Okay, in college, one of my first jobs was I worked at a sanctuary for chimpanzees that had been retired from biomedical research. And they had 15 chimpanzees in Quebec farmland. So it's, outside of Montreal. Very far outside of their range and much colder than their normal range. But there were two chimps there named Binky and Jethro. And they were both 15-year-old males. And Binky was chaos personified. And Jethro, his father had been a space chimp. So Jethro was like super cool, like chill. And they were best friends. And my job was I was the entertainment coordinator, which is a great CV line. And so I painted with them, and I would like paint with them and like do art and stuff with them. And, Jethro would go through like a blue phase and a red phase, but they would like often sit quietly and paint next to each other. Except one day, Binky was acting up like Binky, and he grabbed Jethro's painting from him and he started running through the whole enclosure. And Jethro just lost his mind and like chased him and like was screaming, and they're all screaming. And Binky locked himself in one of the rooms, and looking right at Jethro, he ripped up Jethro's painting, stepped on it, and peed on it. And I'm like, wow, this is a really interesting species. And it was like that, most of the time when I was working in college, I wanted to be a wildlife veterinarian. But it was those moments where they acted like really complex, like making really interesting decisions, having very complex cognition, that I was like, I think I want to study their behavior. Like, this is a interesting animal. They're very much like us. Binky and Jethro, they're still alive. I don't know. I haven't seen them in a while. I mean, they're probably in their 30s now. Yeah, but
maybe settling down. Okay, well, I hope maybe this panel will be that moment for you where you decided what you wanted to explore down the line. I think you can have a few minutes to talk to any of the speakers after this, but let's please thank them one more time.